In the tranquil neighborhood of Maplewood, the Rogers family was the epitome of suburban perfection. Sarah Rogers, a vibrant woman in her late 30s, was known for her infectious laughter and passion for baking, often filling her home with the aroma of fresh cookies. Her husband, Daniel, a charming and attentive man in his early 40s, was a beloved history teacher at the local high school. Together with their teenage daughter, Lily, they seemed to embody the American dream. Their beautiful two-story house, complete with a white picket fence, was the envy of the neighborhood. But behind the cheerful facade, dark secrets were brewing, secrets that would soon unravel their lives in ways no one could predict. It started with the basement. The Rogers had moved into their home 5 years earlier, excited by its vintage charm and spacious layout. But the basement, with its cold cement floors and faint, musty odor, had always felt different. Sarah avoided going down there unless necessary, chalking up her unease to an overactive imagination. But then strange things began happening. Lily complained of hearing faint whispers at night, drifting up from the basement. Objects in the house would go missing, only to be found neatly placed on the basement stairs. At first, they all laughed it off, joking about a mischievous spirit. But as the occurrences became more frequent, the laughter faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. One night, while Daniel was working late, Sarah decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, she descended into the cold, dark space. She found nothing unusual at first, just old furniture, storage boxes, and a broken lamp they'd never gotten around to fixing. But as she moved deeper into the basement, the beam of her flashlight landed on something that made her freeze. It was a door she'd never noticed before. The door was made of heavy wood, its surface scratched and weathered, with a rusted iron handle. It didn't match the rest of the basement's design, as though it had been added much later. Trembling, Sarah tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She called Daniel immediately, her voice shaking as she described her discovery. When Daniel arrived home, he assured her it was probably just an old storage space that the previous owners had sealed off. But when he tried the handle, he found it locked tight. His calm demeanor faltered as he examined the door more closely, noticing deep gouges around the frame, as if someone, or something, had tried desperately to get in or out. Over the next few days, Daniel became obsessed with the door. He spent hours in the basement trying to force it open. Sarah grew increasingly concerned about his fixation, especially as his behavior began to change. He became withdrawn, spending less time with her and Lily. He often stared into space, his once warm eyes now shadowed with a cold intensity. One evening, Sarah confronted him. "What is going on with you, Daniel? It's just a door." "It's not just a door," he snapped, his voice unnaturally harsh. "There's something behind it. I can feel it." Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. While Daniel was at work, she called a locksmith to see if the door could be opened. The locksmith, a gruff older man, examined the lock and shook his head. "This isn't just any lock," he said. "It's custom made, and not by any professional I've ever known. Whatever's behind this door, someone didn't want it found." That night, Sarah decided to tell Daniel about the locksmith, but when he came home, she noticed something strange. There was dirt under his fingernails and a faint smell of earth clinging to him. When she asked about it, he brushed her off, claiming he'd been helping a neighbor with their garden, but Sarah wasn't convinced. A few nights later, Sarah was woken by a loud noise. Heart pounding, she followed the sound down to the basement, where she found Daniel standing in front of the door, a crowbar in his hands. The door was splintered, the lock hanging by a thread. "Daniel, stop!" she cried, but he turned to her with a wild look in his eyes. "I need to know, Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I need to see what's inside." With one final swing of the crowbar, the door gave way. What lay behind it would haunt them forever. The room beyond the door was small, its walls lined with rotting wooden planks. In the center of the room was a single child-sized chair, its paint peeling and the wood warped. Chains hung from the ceiling, their ends bolted to the floor near the chair. The faint smell of decay lingered in the air, and as Sarah's flashlight swept across the room, her beam landed on something that made her gasp, a series of faded, scratched-out names carved into the walls. Daniel dropped the crowbar and backed away, his face pale. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Daniel muttered, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. Over the following weeks, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel knew more than he was letting on. She began digging into the history of their home, visiting the town archives and speaking with neighbors. What she uncovered was chilling. Their house had once belonged to a man named Victor Grayson, who had mysteriously vanished over 30 years ago. Rumors swirled that Victor had been involved in dark rituals and that the basement had been a site of unspeakable acts. When Sarah confronted Daniel with what she'd found, he finally broke down. He confessed that he'd known about the house's dark history when they bought it, but hadn't believed the stories. However, after the door was discovered, he'd started having strange dreams, visions of Victor Grayson standing in their basement, whispering about unfinished business. One stormy night, Sarah woke to find Daniel missing from their bed. She ran to the basement where she found him sitting in the chair, his eyes vacant, whispering Victor's name. Panicking, she tried to pull him away, but it was as if he was in a trance. Suddenly, the basement lights flickered, and the room filled with a deafening roar. When the lights came back on, Daniel was gone. The police searched for weeks but found no trace of him. Sarah, now alone in the house, began hearing whispers in the basement again. She sealed the door, vowing never to open it again. But deep down, she knew the house's secrets weren't done with her. And as the neighbors passed by the Rogers home, they couldn't help but notice the once vibrant house now stood eerily silent, its windows dark, hiding the horrors that had unfolded within.